Well, hello and welcome back to the channel, and in this one we are going to build this Messerschmitt ME410A-1/U2 and U4 from Airfix. Quite a mouthful now, isn't it? And of course you might have noticed that it has been a while I've posted anything on this platform, or any platform for that matter. But, you know, things get in the way, other hobbies, life, etc. So hey ho, what can you do? And before we jump into this box of plastic, I didn't want to do this, but I have to ask you very humbly, politely, to like and subscribe, because YouTube thinks that it's much better for them to not count views as views, like you watching this video. It only counts when you engage with it, so sharing, subscribing, liking, disliking, commenting, whatever. Apparently YouTube's AI algorithm overload only likes that, so we have to appease them. But on a more cheerful note, Gaahleri has its 4th anniversary sale with massive discounts. You can get airbrushes, their brand new water-based acrylic paint lineup, and all the things in between, from airbrush holders to extra stuff, you know, for like everything is on sale. So just go and check out their website, link in my description. If you go with that, then you will get an extra 10% off. But if you would prefer Amazon, for example, you have the coupon code as well in the description that you can use to get 40% off of your purchases on Amazon. So go check them out, it's definitely worth it, and let's roll the tape. And as usual, let's start off with the cockpit. First, we are going to drill these 2 holes for a little thingamabob that is for the big 50mm gun, if you're going to build that version. And in hindsight, it really doesn't matter, because you could potentially put that plastic bit in without the holes. It's just for guidance. But as you are going to close this whole thing up, it's not going to be visible, and I don't think you're going to have this part open, because it's really not having too much detail in there that would make it a valid solution to have it open, but you will see later how it goes. And now we are going to put this little window in, which is in front of the pilot. Now, it's a good question whether it's like a see-through window, because when you have like a massive 50mm cannon obstructing your view, it's hard to believe that you're going to see anything down below, especially that, as far as I know, those 50mm cannons were used as bomber hunters and not ground pounders. So, but I guess because the plane was a multi-role aircraft, you know, it had some parts which were more for ground pounding bombing than bomber hunting. Anyway, let's glue in the backrest for the pilot seat. And then let's put in the seat itself. Now here I want to mention that I actually find the ME410 to be, well, 210, 410 is the same family. I find it really futuristic. When I first came across this plane, and that was the Matchbox kit when I was young, and yeah, I thought it was like a what if plane or something else, because it, yeah, for me, who just only saw, you know, the Stukas and the Messerschmitts, well, the 109s and the 110s, I never heard of the 410 before, so I really couldn't imagine that this was actually a working plane, because how the cockpit looked, how you had this electronics in for the guns and stuff like that. So it really looked like a very futuristic plane, for me at least, back then. Of course, now I know that yes, it was a working plane, and they were built quite a number of them, and that it wasn't that good. Well, especially the 210. The 210 apparently was really horrible. But let's see how Past Me is doing, and for now he's doing quite okay. And I should say that so far everything looks great. The cockpit internals are fine. There is ample detail to play around with if you want, and the fit is great, but there are going to be some problems. But more on that later. Keep in mind that the cockpit comes really in two parts. So you have the frontal, the pilot seat, and the guns underneath. And then you have this frame that goes around the gunner, but the gunner seat itself is going to be put into the wing roots. But you will see that later on. And in terms of how much detail you have on the cockpit sidewalls, not much. There is this big switch box thing that is probably for the turrets themselves because they were electronic. And in terms of instrument panels, now it's quite interesting. You don't have that traditional big instrument panel in front of the pilot. No, you have two parts like that. So you have these tiny parts on both sides of the cockpit wall in front of the pilot, and then you have some instruments down between the pilot's legs. Now Airfix did drop the ball here a bit because they provide decals for these two side ones, but they don't provide decals for the ones which are in front of the pilot, which I think it's a bit of an oversight that they managed. They should provide those as well. And here I'm doing some extra quick work with Dremel to get rid of some excess ejector pin marks. Luckily there aren't too many of these, and even the ones that you have aren't in really prominent places, especially this one that I'm doing right now, which is going to be where the gun internals are, and yeah, that's not going to be really visible anyway, but I did clean it up just for the fun of it. And then using some cement to soften up and get rid of the excess plastic on the top surface, like that. Now here at this part you really want to pay attention. First of all, because the struts is not going to be perfectly flush with the bottom of the wings and the wing root. And second of all, that part there, that is an inner wall for the landing gear bay. So you want to make sure that it fits in there perfectly. And I would advise you to do in two steps. So first you glue in at one side, like I'm doing it here on the left side. And when that's fully cured, then you do the right side, because it's a bit uneven, it's a bit wibbly wobbly, especially in the middle. You have that gap there because the curvature of the wing root, the bottom of the fuselage, doesn't really follow the curve of this middle section, this structural middle section. And now it's all glued in, but I'm going to have a bit of a problem with it later anyway, but as I said, it comes later. And now we're going to put in the top where the gunner sits. Actually, that big tub is not where the gunner sits. The gunner sits above that. So the seat goes on there, on that small notch there. Like that. At first it looks a bit weird, but it's okay. It will go together fine. Just make sure that it's properly aligned horizontally and vertically. Like that. And now we are going to do some testing how the two wing halves fit together. And as you can see, it's not great. It would be great if the wings wouldn't have warped so much. Look at that warpage. Airfix, that is ridiculous. Come on. It's like, what the hell did you do with that plastic, man? It is really warped. Because of this warpage, I had to glue the wings together in stages. So first I concentrated on the wing root and made sure that that's properly cured before I moved on to that insanely warped wing parts over there. But first, again, let's do the wing roots. Interestingly, the instruction sheet wants to tell you to glue the two wing halves on after you put on the completed fuselage on top of the bottom wing. And I wouldn't advise that if the wings are so warped like this, because it's not going to work properly. It's such a hassle to try to keep these wings together. But here I'm using some masking tape, and of course now if you pay close attention to that internal structure there, you can see that I didn't glue it in properly, so there is a gap between the bottom part, which makes the top of it really push on to the top wing half and doesn't let it close it properly. So I had to actually go in and cut it off like that. I don't know how much it's visible, but yeah, I had to cut that part out so I can close the wing. So if you do open landing gear, you really want to pay attention for those things. And now we are clamping down on the rest of the wing to keep them in place. Again, the wing after it's glued together is fine. The warpage didn't do any damage that would have, changed the structure and the overall looks of the wing itself. After it's clamped together, properly cured, glued, everything, it's going to look okay. But yeah, again, this warpage, I presume that this batch is going to have this with every kit. I'm hoping that Airfix with the newer batches doesn't have this problem, because the plastic seems fine. So it seems like it's the newer plastic that they have been using for a number of years now, which I think is way better than that light gray one, which really felt like a much cheaper version of it. That's why I think that it is probably a manufacturing problem and not the problem with the plastic itself. But whilst I'm rambling about Airfix plastics and stuff like that, you can see that I'm using 2 clamps and some masking tape to make sure that the wing is properly glued together. Now that you have seen the left side, let's have a look at the right side. Now, I'm not going to bore you with how I clamped it together and how I tied down everything to make sure that it looks okay. This video existing is the proof that you can do it and it will look okay, but just a bit of taste what you might see in the box. And just look at the wing root at the very edge of the screen. Of course, you can't see too much of it, but there, because sorry about that, the camera wasn't in center, but you can see the wing root is like completely warped. It has like a big arch in it, like a bend, and yeah, in the end it will fit together. But oh my god, Airfix, this warp is horrible. And look at that wing end. So let's go on and do the cannon and just drill it out. One might think that Airfix came a long way and they do a lot of great things, so I do applaud them, but where is the slide molding, guys? Why can't we have slide molded guns now at this point? Everybody else does it, so why aren't you? Jeez. Anyway, it's fine. You can drill it out yourself, but when it comes to such little parts, I'm always a bit worried that I mess it up, because if you mess this up, then you're pretty much screwed. You don't get a second chance, So if you're like me, you could go, use your resin 3D printer, design one, or get someone other's design if they have one, and just print it for yourself. But anyway, let's not get into detail. Guys, Airfix, please do slide molding. It's not that hard. Others can do it, you can do it too. Another thing I would ramble about when it comes to cannons, the other reason why I went for the 50mm one, not just because it looks cooler, but the other version that you get in the kit, which I think it's like 20 or 30mm 2 cannons. Those cannon barrels, those are just 2 bits of plastic rods. There's nothing extra on there. There is absolutely no detail on them. So go with the 50mm. Let's continue and have a look how I painted the internals. And I used Dunkelgrau and some white to mimic the RLM66, because I didn't have it on hand right now. And after I did the initial base coat, I mixed a lighter version of it and did some dry brushing to highlight all the raised detail like that. It's very subtle, so it might not be visible at all, especially with closed cockpit anyway. But you know what they say, practice makes perfect. Even the result of that set practice is not going to be visible at all. And here is the end result, how all the dry brushing made the cockpit look. And again, it looks quite nice. If you're doing open cockpits and stuff like that, it is going to be a decent little extra. But again, it's going to be closed, so not much you're going to see of that. But let's continue with some very dark gray, which is, again, if you have seen other videos of mine, I like to use it as a substitute for black, because I feel like a lot of times black is just too dark for the things that you want to do. So I resort to this very dark gray from AK Third Generations, and I color in the side instruments next to the pilot on both sides. And I've also colored in the instruments in front of the pilot between his legs. Well, in front of his legs. No, I think it's in between. But anyway, those don't have any decals provided by Airfix, which is quite interesting because they are usually really good at decals, but somehow they forgot about those. And then we have the cannons, which I've also painted in with the same dark gray. And these are the 20mm cannons, because this plane, well, this version of ME410, besides the 50mm massive tank cannon, it also had two 20mm cannons, or, well, Germans would call it machine guns. But as you can see, we have here 4 barrels, which is a bit misleading because this version didn't have any. Which means that Airfix didn't really bother to give you 2 different types of bottom panels for the internals based on what version you choose. Again, this is quite annoying because you can see how much Airfix, changed over the years and how good they became with all the extra detail that they now add to their kits, but they always do some shortcuts, and this is not just one of them when it comes to this kit. But moving on, I use some brass color here to add some extra detail, but again, it's not going to be visible at all. It's going to be so buried deep into the plastic that, yeah, you might as well just leave it as it is. But again, practice makes perfect. And now with some medium browns, I'm going to color in the head and leg rest for the pilot. Afterwards, I am going to highlight some of the cockpit details here and there, like buttons, knobs, cranks, valves, anything that would stick out, like these here. And then with some white, I'm going to do the buttons and knobs and cranks here, which is in front of the gunner. I did have a look around the internet, but I haven't found any references specifically for this panel that is in front of the gunner. And honestly, again, just to be a bit negative Nancy against Airfix, they didn't provide too much of a color scheme in the instruction sheets how to color these things in. But now I'm going to use some red on top of the white to make some of the things pop. As I previously mentioned in my previous videos, it's always good to put some white down before you put the red on top, if the button or anything that should be red, or even any kind of other color, because if you put it directly on the dark gray or black even, the color will be lost. It will be too dark for its own good. So you want to have a bit of white underneath, like that. Looks much nicer now. And then I do some wearing chipping on the leather seat, if it was even leather, because we have to keep in mind that this plane was, active late war, like the second half of the war, late-ish. So it might be just some kind of canvas or linen kind of thing, but I did want to add a bit of shade along the edges with some lighter brown, like that. Moving on, I'm adding some metallic sheen to the rudder pedals, because you know the pilot is going to step on them, push them with their feet, so if it had any kind of paint, probably that's the one part that would wear off the most and the fastest. And after I sealed the deal with some VMS satin varnish, I applied the decals. And here I should mention that what you get is not great, and I will be very, very generous by saying this, because I would love to use the S word right now. And yeah, so as I said, you already missing some decals from that middle section instrument panel part that is between the pilot's legs, but the decals that you have on the side panels next to the pilot on both sides, those are really bad. Those are just like black squares, literally, some of the parts. So I just cut off the parts that I could actually use, like 1, 2 like white little parts you can see here. And yeah, I was actually quite baffled, because Airfix usually gives you really nice decals, but somehow they forgot to do the internal parts. And I'm hoping that the newer iteration that they have now on market of this plane has better decals, but the ones that you get with this boxed version, yeah, don't even bother, because they are not great at all. And whilst I was rambling, you can see that I'm using some oil paints like Bob Ross and do some wash around all the instruments to give them a nice pop for all the small details. And this is just regular oil paint thinned down with some odorless thinner. And after that has cured completely, I'm using my trusty scraper to reveal the plastic underneath in places where I need the best bond, whilst I'm going to assemble the fuselage with the cockpit in between. And here comes the assembly. It's quite simple actually. Everything is really good when it comes to fitting like that. See, there are no problems at all. It just goes in and it's done. And all we have to do is run some cement along those edges and everything should be perfect, like that. And a bit more of that, like so. Before gluing the two fuselage halves together, I took my trusty scraper again in my hand and chamfered the edges along the top and bottom of the fuselage halves. I wanted to create that panel line along the fuselage on the top and bottom. I don't know if that's actually dimensionally and historically accurate. I don't care about that much usually, as you may have noticed, but I just wanted to have it because I think it looks cool. Now, I did make it a bit deep, so I should have been a bit more frugal how much I chamfer, but it is a good way to add the panel lines somewhere where you have to fit two parts of plastic together and you know that there is going to be a panel line. So just chamfer the edge a bit and then glue, and then you will have a nice clean panel line without you having to go and scribe it in after everything has been glued together. It's a really simple trick. And now let's use some clamps here, because although I was praising, you know, how well the cockpit fits together, and is still true, but the left side I found that it had a bit of gap between that internal frame and the sidewall, so I used the clamp to hold it in place whilst it's curing, like that. Finally, we can divert our attentions to the rest of the plane, and we start with assembling the two engine cowlings. There is nothing to write home about. It's a very simple two-half kind of thing. you glue them together and it's done. Now here I would advise you to do the chamfering, which I showed you previously, on the top of the engine cowling, because there is, or there should be, a panel line running across that. And if you glue it together as it is, you don't have it. So I had to do the scribing afterwards. So that would be a perfect example where this chamfering, edge chamfering, is a good idea. Like there, as you see on top, I had to rescribe that after the two halves were glued together, and it's not as nice if I would have chamfered. Now I am gluing in the magnet for my flight stand, and if you're interested in one of those, you can find them on my domestic web shop, Etsy or eBay. But links are going to be in the description anyway, so feel free to have a look. And after the magnet has been inserted, let's assemble the fuselage together with the wing. And here I'm going to say something as well, a bit of negative about this plane, and it is that the two wings aren't really properly aligned with the fuselage. And I actually had a look at other creators, what they assembled, and yes, the two wing parts are misaligned compared to each other and compared to the fuselage. And here is the best frame which I could find to show you the problem. And here, if you closely look at the alignment of the wing roots against the fuselage, you can see that the panel lines are a bit off to each other. And yeah, I think this is a problem, and I don't think that you can solve this easily, because the thing is that the whole wing, how it assembles, and then the whole wing section goes together with the fuselage is just not something that you can fix easily. So I don't know if this was fixed at all in the newest version of the plane. Probably not, because how else would you fix this? But yeah, it is a problem. It was very annoying when I saw it, and when you see it, you cannot unsee it at all. But I just literally just cut my losses, said that yeah, it is what it is going to stay like that and be done, because what else can you do? I'm not going to fill in the panel lines and rescribe everything, because that would be insane. So I just left it as it is. It's like 1 or 2 millimeter difference. It's not huge, but it is visible. And if you are a rivet counter, you know that you're going to flip out of this, because I flipped out a bit. So, and this is not the end of it. There is something more that you're going to flip out on, and more on that later. Whilst I'm assembling the horizontal stabilizers, which come in 2 pieces, as you saw, and Airfix is generous enough to give you 2 versions of the elevators, being in resting position or in flight position. And the same goes for these leading edge wing slats here. You can have it open or closed. Well, given that my in-flight position is going to be like the plane flying in a straight line with high speed, so the slats wouldn't open at that point. The only negative part is that I felt like those wing slats are a bit too protruding, so you had a very prominent step between the surface of the wing and the wing slat, and usually those are flush together when they are closed. So I had to scrape a lot of it off to make it seem like to be flush. Moving on to the ailerons, here you have these counterweights. There are 2 of them, like these 2 tiny parts that you glue onto the aileron itself, and then you put those into their respective holes on the wing. Just like that. They actually go in relatively easily, and they form a really good bond with the wing section itself. And like, this is the thing, you can see that Airfix has good ideas and good execution. Like this, I think this works really well, and it's quite simple and it's still effective. and I quite like this part. And there are many other parts of this plane, especially in the cockpit, which I quite liked. But then you have the problem with the wing roots, which I showed you, and then you have this, for example, this forward canopy part in the middle of the cockpit nose, which is just dangling there. So I had to use a clamp to hold it in place whilst the cement is curing. And I felt like that it's a bit different in the arch that it has compared to the nose section part of the fuselage halves. And yeah, it was a bit, again, as what I would usually say, finicky, but of course it's manageable. But I don't understand that, for example, for this one, why didn't they give like a better way to insert it? That's my question here. This insertion of this canopy part is not too great. And by not too great, I not just mean that inserting it in the right way is finicky, but you have to use quick drying cement instead of PVA glue, because usually people would use PVA glue to glue in canopy parts, clear parts, so it's not going to be fogged up by the glue itself if you mess things up. And you cannot do that because PVA glue wouldn't be strong enough to hold all those parts together. So the nose sections would separate after a while and just open up, and then you would have a really ugly gap right in front of the nose of the cockpit. And moving on, and trying not to ramble here again, but the way how they did the top canopy part as well in these three parts isn't great either, because even if you want to do an open cockpit, this is not how the cockpit of the ME410 opened. You would need 3 or 4 sections of the canopy here to make sure that you can do an open cockpit version of it, because with this version you can't. Also, it was never mentioned that, for example, in the cockpit, in the canopy here, you have 2 struts running along on the inside that you want to color in the inside with the cockpit internal color, which I did. As you see, I just masked it. And also you can see that I added Huns and fronts to the plane as well, because nobody wants to have planes being piloted by ghosts. And I still have a lot of PJ Productions little 1/72 scale figures that I can use in these planes, because Airfix doesn't provide any, sadly. But besides the 2 pilots, you also have these 2 triangular things which were added in by Airfix, because these frames are a part of the internal structure of the cockpit, so you have to add them in before you would close up the canopy. Fitting the canopy on top of the cockpit after it was fully assembled does have its own quirk a bit at the end of it, where you have the corner position, because there are 2 little tiny protruding plastic parts for the handles that are in the way, but a bit of finagling and it is okay. And I know that previously I just mentioned that a lot of people use PVA glue just to not use quick drying cement to fog up the canopy. I decided to use quick drying cement because I like to live on the edge. And before we get to painting, I also had to go and fill up some of these nasty gaps here and there. Well, don't worry, there weren't too many, but there were some which couldn't be ignored, like this one here. And I filled them up with some Vallejo water-based putty. And after I filled up everything, you can use just a cotton bud with some tap water and just rub away the excess after 20-30 minutes of drying. And after that was done, we have still one thing to go, is to do all the canopy frames and mask them in. And I know I complained a lot during this video, but I will complain again because why not? You know, someone has to do it. And my complaint is that it's 2025. Why on earth can't we have masking for all of these canopies at this point? I see it more and more happening, so I am happy that more and more manufacturers do give you canopy masks, but somehow Airfix is not one of them still. And that's a bit annoying, especially when you have a canopy like the ME410 one with lots of small frames and everything. And then I haven't even mentioned the back part where the gunner sits. Now that's an extra finicky part. It's still doable, but I would have loved to have out of the box masking provided by the manufacturer, in this case Airfix. So please, Airfix, for the love of God, please give us masking next time. It's just a piece of sticky paper. If that's like an extra 1 or 2 pounds on the cost, you know, I would happily give you that money for the extra masking sheet, especially with planes like this. And I haven't even talked about the B-25s and the 17s and whatnot with all those little tiny canopies. You know, that's an extra level of hurt. But anyway, now that I did all the edges along the frames, now I am filling them in with masking liquid. To be completely honest with you, this part, as much as I hate doing it, it is strangely comforting. When you get in the zone, you can go through it, you know, even if it takes like 2-3 hours, it doesn't feel like that much. It doesn't feel like that it's a chore. But starting it, you know, knowing that I'm going to spend 3 hours on masking this canopy up, it's going to take a lot of time, is what annoying, when I could do it like in half an hour if we would have pre-cut masks set. Anyway, here I'm using this masking liquid to mask off some parts which I will have to glue in. So like these parts are the radiators on the wings, well, beneath the wings, that I am doing separately, and I'm just going to glue them in after everything was painted. So I've masked those parts off so I don't have to scrape the paint off later. And now I am using my mock-up RLM66 again to paint in the frames from the inside. They are RLM66 and not something else that would go on top. And when that's done, we are going to use some no peel primer from VMS, the gray one, and go through the whole thing. Now I had very different kind of experiences with this primer. One thing I can say for sure, that it's a good primer, but you have to shake the hell out of it just to make sure that it will be shaken up properly. You really have to shake it, like really. And yeah, it goes on out of the bottle straight away. And you want to do a wet surface, because if you spray it from too far, then you will get a really rough, grainy texture of it. That's the other thing that you have to keep in mind. And probably for planes, a very grainy surface texture, very grainy surface texture is not the best choice. And after everything has dried, you can see I'm going to do the panel line shading as well. I've been doing that for quite some time now. I know that people do now reverse pre-shading and whatnot, where they have like black base, but they do like this white mottling per panels. I am a lazy guy. I'm going to do just this kind of panel line shading and be done with it. And here again, you can be sloppy as hell. It doesn't matter. I'm just using a regular black here. So no fancy stuff, just regular black, and just go along the panel lines and wherever you want and just highlight them. Next up, we are going to do the bottom of the plane with Atom paints from AmmoMig RLM 76, and just do a bit of mottling, bit of stippling, not going all in, you know, so give a bit of a variation for the color. And of course I did thin it down quite considerably with Atom's own thinner. Also, I think you can use IPA, so isopropyl alcohol, as well to thin it. I did try it with metallics with quite some success. So metallics are definitely an okay thing to thin down, but regular paints of theirs, so the non-metallic paints they have in this Atom lineup, yeah, that might not work well, but you can always try and see where it goes. Moving on to the top surface, let's do first the lighter color, which is RLM 75, the same Atom paint from Ammo by MIG. And I should really praise these paints because they are quite good. Their coverage out of the bottle is really nice. So if you are the one coat guy, you know, who just wants to do one coat and be done with, then these paints are going to be really right up your alley. If you want to do something similar what I do here, you know, stippling, mottling, you know, having a bit of a transparency going on, you know, then you have to really thin them down. And I really recommend using their own thinners. I tried other ones like Vallejo Mission Models and AK 3rd Gen acrylic thinner. Neither of them worked with it, so you want to stick with their own thinners for this. And you can really thin them down so you have this transparency going on, as you can see here on the video. Now let's do the size of the fuselage, and here, just for, you know, the sake of randomness, let's do another rant. And that is because Airfix messed up the instructions how to paint the plane. And they messed it up because if you look at the image here, it really looks like that the main color is RLM 75, that light gray. And then you have the darker parts, which are RLM 74. But that's not the case. That is actually RLM 76. If you look at historical reference images, that light gray should be the same light blue that's the wing underside. And it really tripped me up. I messed up the first part of the painting, which I had to fix after I finished all the painting, continuing on with RLM 74 from the Atom lineup by Ammo. Now you see that I did a remasking, so I masked up the RLM 75 parts, and now I'm doing the 74 the same way as I did with everything else, you know, a bit of stippling, mottling and stuff like that. Thinned it with its own thinner, as I stated previously, that's the best way to go. You could potentially thin it with IPA. I did try the metallics being thinned with IPA, so the Atom metallics, and they turned out quite well, just with the regular 98% or something IPA, it was fine. I haven't tried it with these regular colors, these military colors yet, but I will give it a go and see what happens. Finishing up the top surfaces with 74, now I am doing the side part, doing the mottling, and this was the part where I actually realized that something is really off compared to the images what I have in the instructions and what it would look like, because it didn't look like it's just two colors. It really looked like that it's three, but something was off, because what was the third one? Because it wasn't the light blue, it wasn't RLM 75, it wasn't RLM 76, so what is it then? And that's when I started to look at reference images, and then I realized that, oh shit, it's actually 76 all the way right up, like until the midsection of the fuselage. So I went on, loaded up 76 again into my airbrush, and I did the modeling with that all across the fuselage surface from back to forth on both sides. I don't know really what other people think about this kit and how they feel about it, but it definitely feels like that Airfix did manage to drop the ball on several occasions, and we are not even done yet. There is one more thing that we have to talk about later. And yeah, I mean, I don't mind, you know, to do some digging around, especially in the age of the internet where you have a lot of information, you know, that you can look at to make sure that something is historically accurate and whatnot, you know. So there is a lot of resource that you can look at. But I don't like when I would have to do out of necessity just to make sure that everything is okay, because the people at the manufacturing bench weren't able to make sure that they are not going to give wrong information and bad parts and so on and so forth. So it would be nice if it's a big company like Airfix that they make sure that everything is a-okay. It doesn't have to be, you know, everything 100% accurate. You know, you can have a few missing panel lines, that's fine, potentially. But like this with the paint scheme, that's quite annoying. But anyway, after I finished painting, I did use some VMS satin varnish and sealed the deal as usual. Again, I love VMS varnishes. They are one of the best. I highly recommend them every time. And yeah, I'm still not sponsored. I would love to, but yeah, I'm still not sponsored. It's really my personal experience. And a good one, generous single coat, you know, is perfect. That's what you want. And before I forget, there is also RLM70 that is used on the propellers. I do apologize that there is no footage for the assembly, but it's a very basic stuff. If you ever assembled 1/72 scale warbirds, you know very well how it goes. You have a 3-part system usually, where you have like a top and a bottom and the midsection, which are the propeller blades themselves, usually as just one piece. That's it. No fancy stuff. Now we are edging closer and closer to the end ever so slightly by doing the decals. And yeah, there are a lot of them. And this is what I didn't understand when I was doing the cockpit, that Airfix gave you so many decals for the top surface of the plane. So how comes that the cockpit was so bad? Anyway, you can see that I messed up this dotted line decal and actually managed to break it up into 3 parts. Now this is the only time I broke it up, but that doesn't mean that it's not delicate. It can be delicate because I broke it up, as you see. But again, if you are careful and everything, it shouldn't be a problem at all. I managed to rearrange the whole thing, and it's not visible afterwards that it was broken up, but anyway, it happened. And the other thing is that there were so many decals here that they even provided these really tiny single-digit numbers that go along the fuselage beneath the cockpit, beneath the canopy. And they are so small, they are like 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter. And I just said, no, I am not going to do those, because they are so small that, first of all, you're not being able to see them anyway. Second of all, you might even lose them whilst you're trying to apply them, and then you will have numbers missing. So I just said, no, I don't need this, don't need these numbers. I did the rest though, so I did the rest of the decals except for those tiny numbers. And here is how the whole dotted line part looks. Of course, this is going to be on both wings, and it's a bit of a work, I won't lie. It does take some time, especially trying to arrange them properly. Now I'm doing this spiral shape onto the propellers. This is the first time I actually doing such thing. I did chicken out when I was building the this Stuka in 1/35 scale from border models, but here I was like, yeah, let's try it, and if it doesn't work, then I will just, you know, have it as just a single color or something. And actually I was pleasantly surprised. Okay, again, probably because it's a cartograph tackle, so it worked really well. Anyway, let's move on and let's see the last big rant I'm going to have about this kit, and it's called Airfix, and it's this part. Here you can see that we have multiple little interesting detail, and those are missing from the rest of the plane. Those should be, I think, should be on both sides of each engine cowling, and they aren't. They are actually missing, but you have the decals, you have all the decals for all the sides of the engine cowlings, both left and right, but there is just only one side having those details actually in the plastic. Anyway, let's move on. Now I'm not going to follow up on this part completely, you know, but yes, Airfix doesn't provide you the funny cross of the Third Reich that you can put in on the vertical stabilizers, so you have to get it from somewhere else. If you have multiple kits in your stash, then you might have some kits from other manufacturers who do, and you can then use those, which I did here as well. Okay, I think that's enough of this one. Let's move on and see what else we can do on this plane. And this is not from the kit itself, this is from a separate kit, and I just like to add, you know, my own personal touch to each model if I'm not going very much to be historically accurate in any kind of sense, and I usually don't, and you might know this if you have seen other content from me. But anyway, I've added this to, you know, mix things up a little. And after everything was done and sealed with, again, with satin varnish from VMS, we are going to do some penoline wash. It's the same kind of oil paint I usually use, the Winsor & Newton one, and just using some odorless spinner to thinning it up right nicely and just running it along all the panel lines. I'm a bit sloppy because I will use it as a shader as well in the meantime. And when that was done, I actually gave it quite a long rest, like a whole night, I think. And then I went on and used the cotton bud, dipped into the same odorless thinner I used thinning the paint, and rubbed away all my problems and the excess oil paint. Now I'm adding in these two plastic parts into the engine cowlings. Now these are to hold the propellers in place. The instruction would say that you have another third plastic bit that goes behind this and is glued against the propeller in itself, so it doesn't fall out. But I found it that the propeller sits in it so snugly that you don't really need anything extra, and it's always nice to be able to remove the propellers if you do anything, like you want to transport the plane or you want to, you know, just take it off and clean it. If you don't want to risk of damaging the propellers or anything, you can take those out and then clean the plane and then put it back up. Now let's insert the exhaust. Nothing fancy here. Sorry, I don't have any footage of me priming and just putting down some metallic paint on top. But we are already almost at 1 hour in content, so I don't think you're going to miss anything if I'm not showing that to you. They fall into place easily. Nothing fancy here either. Looking great. Now with some extra glue, we make sure that everything sits tightly. And then we added all the top covers like that. Those don't have very specific locator pins or holes, but strangely enough, they really fall into place. And just a tiny amount of glue and it's done. Now let's get to the finish line with a tiny amount of weathering. And when I'm talking about tiny, there are just two things, well, three things that I did. One is this, where I added a bit of dark and light sienna brownish colors to mimic, you know, all the dirt that the crew and everybody who got onto the wing roots, you know, left it there. And the other part is that I did is a bit of dirt mimicking on the bottom where the landing gear bays are, and of course the exhaust stains. Here I had a base black streaking, and then I used dark sienna for a bit of variety in texture on top, and finally I gave it a very gentle amount of white as far as the new fresh smoke buildup that would follow, you know. So just to have a bit of variation here and there. I might have overdone it actually. I think it's a bit stark, all the smoke stain, but in the end I was relatively satisfied, and I'm not going to go and remove all of it. But finally we are at the end, and here it is, ME410 from Airfix in all its glory. And I know I was very critical of Airfix in many ways, and for me at least it feels like the criticism is valid, but I will give credit where credit is due. It's a really nice version of the ME410 in 1/72nd scale, and I don't think that there is anything else that even comes close to the quality right now on the market. So if you want to have a 1/72nd scale ME410, I think you are going to be pleasantly surprised by this kit. It is good enough. Although I would love to see Airfix fixing the problems which I just mentioned, which I think some of them can be fixed, like a new decal set is probably easy. Fixing the molds, you know, to have some missing details, surface details, now that's tricky. I don't think that's going to happen, but the decals I think need to be fixed. Other than that, yeah, it's a really good kit. And what else can I say? Oh yeah, as I mentioned in the beginning, please like and subscribe, leave a comment, do anything, you know, that this view turns into an engagement because of YouTube, algorithm gods, how they work. And also go and check out Gaahleri, because they have a massive sale and they have a lot of new stuff on their website which you might want to have a look at, from airbrushes to the new lineup of water-based acrylic paints they have, and all in between. So go and check them out, links in the description. If you want to buy from Amazon, you will have that coupon code there as well, you know. And as I always say, stay safe, happy modeling, and see you on the next one. Bye bye.